Hey there, it's Reverend Nhien, founder of Evolving Enneagram. If you've been seeking a compassion-based contemplative approach to Enneagram inner work, you are certainly in the right place. We are in the midst of a 52-week Sunday talk series based on this book by Oren Sofer, Your Heart Was Made for This. And last week, we explored the topic of compassionate curiosity and how bringing compassionate curiosity inward can support you in actually realizing greater truth about your being, and then bringing compassionate curiosity to others can support you in seeing reality more clearly. And of course, from my unity bias, there's this idea that as we see reality more clearly, we are also more connected to the intrinsic unity and harmony of all being. This week, I'd like to explore with you the topic of bringing the active and passive components of curiosity, as discussed by Sofer in his book, into your contemplative practice, basically your approach to spiritual realization, whatever that might mean for you. But this inward approach, we might call it self-realization, like self with a capital S, the realization, just spiritual realization, divine realization, or the realization of God. So whatever the terminology is, how might recognizing the active and passive components of curiosity support you in that journey? Stay tuned. We'll be exploring that today. All right, I'd like to begin with a quote from Oren Sofer. He writes, "Contemplative practice turns the immense power of curiosity inward. Integrating interest with energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom, we can open to transformative realizations about the human heart, consciousness, and the nature of existence. As with aspiration, curiosity has both receptive and active components, integrating yin and yang energies. The yin aspect of curiosity is receptive and open, the sensitive attention that arises when we close our eyes and lean in to smell a rose. Curiosity arises from mystery and humility. Real learning flows from a willingness to not know. The active yang aspect of curiosity focuses. When we lean in to smell the flower, our attention gathers immediately and effortlessly around a single point, right? When we study a problem, the yang aspect of curiosity consolidates and magnifies attention, giving a penetrative focus to the inquiry. To truly smell a rose requires both receptivity and one-pointed interest." And so that last line in particular is what I want to bring in and relate to our contemplative practice. So I'd like to offer that our approach to the divine is just like this, just like smelling a rose. So what do you need to do? What are the active aspects of that approach, right? Maybe it's about creating a special altar, a space, a sacred space at home for your meditation practice. Maybe, like me, I've scheduled this coming week, Wednesday through Friday, 2 nights, a silent and solitary retreat in a local retreat center here near where we live in the Kansas City area. Right, that these are active things that I do in my approach. Active could also mean adopting a certain posture, like sitting down, right? Setting a space. You can maybe see this little Buddha over here. There's some certain spaces for sitting that create this ambiance, right? That lends itself to me paying special attention. Right? Like I believe the divine is everywhere present, right? We don't need to go to church. We don't need to go to any special place. But what I found is when we create some sort of when we actively create sacred space for ourselves, it's almost like a gesture of our intentionality, right? So we adopt that sitting posture, cross-legged, or we might chant first. Like sometimes I like to use music or chanting to get myself in a certain mode that feels more receptive, right? So you can even hear in that the active component supports the receptivity in my practice. So my active desire or curiosity toward God, right, by whatever name you want to call God, supports, then is ideally only part of what supports my larger opening toward the experience of the divine, whether I call that divine love or divine light or wisdom, etc. So I recall one of my favorite lines in the Bible that I'll quote often is, "Keep thine eye single unto the Lord." And, there are many more literal interpretations of this. For me, it's about if I focus my attention and my life priorities on a relationship to spirit, right? That then I live centered in a connection that supports inner peace and presence and love throughout all the doings and happenings and experiences of my life. I know this by experience because at times when I have neglected to make those intentional efforts, I've noticed that little things can throw me off, render me more anxious or insecure about how things are going for myself or my life in my relationships. And then the not enoughness of my childhood messaging really creeps in and starts to get louder, right? Even though, I've been on this journey for years, if I'm not actively interested in that relationship with spirit, first and foremost. So active curiosity, the desire to know in an embodied way, the divine. So you might tell your family members to leave you alone at a certain time so you have this space, right? There are very active things we can do. Reading before you meditate. A lot of folks like to read in Unity. A lot of folks read the daily word, a daily devotional that we have. So those are ideas for your active practice. Then consider, I want to say from the Enneagram point of view, you might consider that, let's just contrast 9 and 8. This is not going to be primarily an Enneagram talk. I really want you to just consider this for your spiritual practice, even almost apart from the Enneagram. But there's certain, patterns we might see where, the 9's more stereotypical fixated passivity can make it harder for the 9 to initiate something that needs to happen to activate their spiritual journey, right? There could be a default. Even regular centering prayer practice for 9s can be a way that you check out and that you're passive and that you're not actually deeply receptive, because you first have to really reignite and engage and be fully present for your path, and then you surrender. The active can come first before the passive, but a lot of 9s are, well, we should start with the passive and end with the passive, right? And then for 8s, just to contrast, it could be the opposite, where the 8's go get it mentality, I'm doing this, I'm making this happen energy, and even a lot of talking to God, right, the God of our understanding in the meditative practice, or even having a conversation, right? Nothing wrong with any of this, but just look at the balance of how there's so much yang, perhaps, or doing or activation rather than receptivity. You're moving toward the rose, but can you just sit back and smell it, right? Receive it. And so moving into the passive element, I want to encourage you to really consider Paramahansa Yogananda, one of my core spiritual teachers, has talked about this meditative practice as, okay, well, you set it all up, and then you enter into a time of stillness, right? And for me, I know that there have been times where I have started to get a little sloppier in my spiritual practice, where I'm more active, even physically. I'll let myself adjust and move around a lot more. And I noticed that movement, it's still my mind or my consciousness directing what's happening, and there isn't a chance to really kind of fall into the divine, like empty into that space, because I'm fiddling around, right? I'm moving, I'm adjusting, I'm not comfortable, and considering that, that's one way the material world can like distract from the spiritual world and our ability to connect with it. So more recently, I've actually actively, right, this is my active will piece, I've decided, oh, I'm not going to let that happen. I'm not going to adjust, even if it's itchy, like I'll just sit there. And I found that just that more passive, receptive curiosity is like I'm more available, right? And there's an ability for this almost like subtlety that we can sense when we're truly still inside, begins to emerge more in that, and this connection becomes more felt, more substantial, more powerful. Yeah, it's like there's this subtlety to this realm that isn't available to me when I am too active, even in my approach to contemplative practice. And Yogananda, going back to Yogananda, has used the term waiting on God. And again, I love that, because there is the sense of, if I'm waiting, it's like I'm there, I'm present for it, but I'm not doing anything, right? Like I'm not necessarily, I'm just waiting and that's it. Like just patiently sitting there, right? So to truly smell a rose requires both receptivity and one pointed interest. To truly smell a rose requires both receptivity and one pointed interest. This week, even if you're thinking to yourself, I can't take a couple days away for a solitary retreat, maybe you can, because, arguably I could say that to myself all the time. There are always people who need me, etc., but especially because our contemplative practices in the Enneagram groups are currently on a 2-week break. And then we start up again the week of April 15th, right? So during that time, rather than lose your contemplative practice that you've gained in the community, right? Like this is a time to maybe even deepen it and spend more time in solitude, silence, or stillness in your own way. But see if you can't use your active willpower, your faculties, to make certain things happen, to put things in place that then enable you to have more surrendered and receptive breathing space, right? So do that outwardly for your contemplative practice, but do that inwardly, so that when you're actually sitting in meditation, you first approach it in this alert way, where you're not just doing it by rote, but there's intentionality, there's one-pointedness in your focus, and then drop into that place of quietude where you're not filling up the space with your questions or your conversation or your petitioning of the divine, but simply waiting on God in the silence, in the stillness, possibly even in solitude.